June 14th, 1944. The sunken lane near Villers-Bocage, France. Heat waves shimmer off the scorched engine deck as Obersturmführer Karl Rost presses his eye against the cupola periscope. The air inside the 57-ton steel beast is stagnant, smelling of stale sweat, diesel fumes, and the metallic tang of fear. Rost wipes a bead of perspiration from his forehead, his knuckles white as he grips the commander's hatch. Outside, the lush green hedgerows of the Normandy countryside mask a deadly labyrinth, and somewhere beyond that wall of vegetation, the distinct metallic squeal of unoiled tracks cuts through the humid afternoon silence like a knife. This is the Bocage, a tactical nightmare where ancient hedgerows turn every field into a fortress and every country road into a potential grave. Tiger 231 sits motionless in the deep shadows, its massive hull adorned with fresh oak branches and foliage to break up its distinctive, boxy silhouette against the leafy backdrop. The 5 men inside constitute a single organism, their lives inextricably bound to the thick steel plates surrounding them. They have been waiting here for 3 agonizing hours, engines off to conserve precious fuel, listening intently to the distant, rolling rumble of naval artillery that serves as the constant background score to their war. Down in the driver's compartment, Hans, the driver, rests his heavy head against the thick vision block, his eyes closed but his ears straining for the sound of approaching armor. Beside him, the radio operator, Friedrich, fiddles nervously with the fine-tuning dials of his Fugue 5 radio set, keeping the volume critically low to avoid betraying their position with a burst of static. The transmission casing between them radiates heat like a cast-iron stove, turning the forward hull into a sauna that saps their energy. Hans knows that if they need to move, he must be perfect, as the heavy Maybach engine requires a delicate touch to avoid stalling. In the turret, the gunner, Richter, sits hunched over his optics, his hand resting lightly on the traverse wheel to keep his muscles warm. He stares endlessly at the specific patch of road Rost has indicated, the fine crosshairs of his Zeiss sight etched into his retinas from the intensity of his focus. Behind him, the loader, Braun, checks the stack of 88mm shells for the 10th time, running his grease-stained fingers over the brass casings to ensure they are free of grit that could jam the breech. The massive breech block of the KWK 36 gun separates them, a cold slab of steel that will soon recoil with enough violence to crush a man. The squealing sound grows louder, joined now by the deep, throbbing growl of radial engines which marks the enemy. It is a distinct sound, higher pitched and more erratic than the heavy, rhythmic drone of German motors. Rost stiffens in the cupola, adjusting the focus on his binoculars as he peers through the gaps in the hawthorn hedge. The ground beneath the tracks begins to tremble slightly, a vibration that travels up through the torsion bar suspension and into the boots of the crew. They know this sound intimately, having heard it in Africa and Russia, but here in the confined lanes of France, it sounds like an approaching freight train. A plume of dust rises above the hedge line 300 meters to the east, signaling the enemy's approach. Rost whispers into his throat microphone, his voice crackling softly through the headsets of his crew. He warns them to stay steady and hold their fire until his command. Through the thick foliage, the first shape emerges, a rounded olive-drab turret characterized by the white star painted on its side. It is a Sherman, the workhorse of the American and British armored divisions, moving cautiously down the narrow dirt road with its gun barrel sweeping left and right in search of danger. 1 tank becomes 2, then 3, as they emerge from the bend in the road. Following closely in a standard column formation, Rost counts them off quietly, his heart rate accelerating with each new arrival. A 4th tank appears, followed by a 5th bringing up the rear. 5 M4 Shermans against a single Tiger I. The odds might seem overwhelming to an outsider, but Rost knows the capabilities of his machine and the terror it inspires. However, in this dense terrain, the advantage of long-range engagement is negated, and the fight will happen at point-blank distances where even the Sherman's 75mm gun can be lethal. The German commander calculates the geometry of the ambush rapidly as the enemy closes the distance. The lead Sherman is approaching a small stone bridge that creates a natural choke point. If they can disable the leader there, the column will be trapped. Unable to advance and struggling to reverse in the narrow lane, Rost rotates the periscope to check his flanks one last time, ensuring no infantry are creeping up to plant explosives on his engine deck. He is isolated, without infantry support of his own, relying entirely on surprise and the thickness of his frontal armor to survive the next 5 minutes. As the column inches closer, Rost notices a crucial detail on the second tank in the line. Its barrel is significantly longer than the others, ending in a distinct muzzle break, and the turret has a bustle box extension. It is a Sherman Firefly, the British modification armed with the high-velocity 17-pounder gun. This is the only weapon in the Allied column that can reliably punch through the Tiger's frontal plate at this range. The priority of targets shifts instantly in Rost's mind, but shooting the second tank first might alert the leader too soon, allowing it to escape the kill zone. Rost speaks clearly to Richter, guiding the gunner's aim toward the lead tank, but keeping the Firefly in mind for the immediate follow-up. He orders the loader to load an armor-piercing capped shell, the standard medicine for Allied steel. The clatter of the heavy round sliding into the breech echoes loudly in the silent turret, followed by the metallic clank of the breech block sliding shut. Richter reports that he has the target acquired, his foot hovering over the firing pedal. The turret rotation mechanism whines softly as he makes a micro-adjustment to lead the moving target. The lead Sherman rolls onto the small bridge, its tracks clattering loudly on the stone surface. The American commander is visible in the hatch, looking relaxed, perhaps believing the sector is clear. Rost feels a pang of detached sympathy for the man who is about to die, but it is instantly replaced by the cold logic of survival. The Tiger's engine remains off. The tank, a silent predator, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The distance closes to under 200 meters. Rost takes a deep breath, filling his lungs with the stale air and visualizing the sequence of destruction. He waits for the lead tank to fully expose its side profile as it turns slightly to cross the bridge. A side shot is guaranteed destruction, likely igniting the ammunition or fuel storage. If he misses or bounces the shot, the element of surprise is lost, and 5 turrets will traverse to pound his position. The discipline required to hold fire is immense, contrasting sharply with the primal urge to strike first and run. Rost watches the white star on the Sherman's hull center itself in his vision. The moment hangs in the air, stretched thin by adrenaline and the ticking of the clock. Driver, start engine. Rost commands, his voice dropping an octave to signal the beginning of violence. Hans engages the starter, and the massive Maybach HL 230p 45 V12 engine coughs into life with a roar that shatters the pastoral silence. Birds erupt from the hedgerows in a frantic cloud. The element of stealth is gone, replaced by the terrifying acoustic signature of Germany's heavy armor. The American commander on the bridge spins his head around, eyes widening as he spots the angular, camouflage-painted shape of the Tiger emerging from the shadows of the tree line. Gunner. Target front, range 200. Fire, Rost screams the order, cutting through the sudden noise of the engine. Richter does not hesitate, his training taking over as he stomps on the firing pedal. The 88mm gun erupts, sending a shockwave through the chassis that throws the crew against their restraints. A distinct flash of flame bursts from the muzzle brake, instantly obscured by a cloud of propellant smoke. Inside the tank, the air pressure spikes violently, ringing their ears and filling the compartment with the acrid, stinging smoke of the discharge. The shell bridges the short gap in a fraction of a second, moving faster than the speed of sound. It slams into the side of the lead Sherman just above the tracks, the impact sounding like a giant sledgehammer hitting an anvil. Sparks shower the dry grass as the projectile punches through the armor plate, instantly killing the forward momentum of the American tank. The machine shudders violently, slewing sideways on the bridge, effectively sealing the road. The ambush has begun, and the Tiger has drawn first blood in the deadly duel that will decide their fate. The violent recoil of the 88mm gun transforms the interior of the turret into a chaotic sensory overload. The massive breech block slams backward with the force of a freight train, stopping just inches from the rear firewall before sliding forward again into the battery position. A searing hot brass casing is ejected automatically, clattering loudly into the deflector guard and tumbling onto the floor plates with a metallic ringing sound. The air inside the fighting compartment instantly thickens, filled with the acrid, biting stench of burnt propellant that stings the eyes and coats the back of the throat with a chemical taste. The ventilation fan whirs frantically on the roof, struggling to suck out the poisonous fumes, but it fights a losing battle against the sheer volume of smoke generated by the high-velocity discharge. Braun, the loader, is already moving before the echo of the shot has faded inside the steel hull. He ignores the stinging smoke and the deafening ringing in his ears, his body operating on pure muscle memory drilled into him during training in Paderborn. He reaches into the ready rack on his right, his gloved hands gripping the base of a 20-pound armor-piercing shell. The weight is substantial, but adrenaline makes it feel light as he swings it around in the confined space. He must be careful not to smash the warhead against the delicate optics or the commander's legs as he maneuvers the projectile toward the open breach. With a grunt of exertion, he shoves the nose of the shell into the chamber and slams his fist against the base to seat it. The breech block snaps shut automatically, with a vicious metallic clank that signifies the weapon is armed and dangerous once more. "Up," Braun shouts, his voice strained but clear over the roar of the engine. This single word tells Richter that the gun is ready to fire. Richter, however, is fighting his own battle with the machinery. The target is obscured by the cloud of dust and smoke kicked up by the muzzle blast. He furiously rotates the handwheels of the turret traverse, making fine adjustments to his aim. Through the high-quality Zeiss optics, the world is a magnified circle of destruction. But currently, he is staring into a grey fog, waiting for a glimpse of olive-drab armor to reappear so he can deliver the second blow. Down in the hull, Hans wrestles with the mechanical soul of the Tiger. The Maybach HL 230 P45 engine behind them is screaming at 3,000 revolutions per minute. A deafening cacophony of 12 cylinders fighting to move 57 tons of dead weight. Hans knows that staying static is a death sentence. The Tiger's greatest advantage is its armor, but its greatest weakness is immobility. He grips the heavy steering wheel, which looks deceptively like a car's but controls a complex hydraulic system. His feet dance on the pedals, managing the clutch and the accelerator with the precision of a concert pianist. The transmission is a semi-automatic pre-selector gearbox, a marvel of German engineering that requires a firm hand and perfect timing to shift without stripping the gears. Hans shifts into a lower gear to pivot the hull, utilizing the tank's ability to turn in place. The tracks groan and screech in protest as they tear up the earth, churning the soft soil of the French countryside into a muddy paste. The vibration is intense, rattling every bolt and loose piece of equipment inside the tank. The sheer mass of the vehicle makes every movement feel sluggish and heavy, yet unstoppable. Hans watches his gauges closely. The oil temperature is rising, and the engine is prone to overheating if pushed too hard in this summer heat. He is the master of the beast's movement, and if the engine dies now, they become a stationary pillbox for the enemy to dismantle at their leisure. Obersturmführer Rost, standing in the commander's cupola, has the most complete view of the unfolding chaos. Through his periscopes, he sees the lead Sherman burning fiercely, black oily smoke billowing into the sky and creating a visual barrier on the narrow road. The trap has worked perfectly to block their path, but the remaining 4 tanks are reacting with desperate aggression. They are not retreating. Instead, they are fanning out, crashing through the hedgerows and into the adjacent fields to find cover and firing positions. The disciplined column has dissolved into a frantic scramble for survival, with engines revving and tracks tearing through the vegetation. Rost's eyes lock onto the second tank, the one he identified earlier as the Firefly. It has pulled off the road to the left, crashing through a wooden fence and bringing its long barrel around to bear on the Tiger's position. The threat it poses is existential. The standard 75mm guns of the other Shermans will struggle to penetrate the Tiger's thick frontal armor at this range, but the Firefly's 17-pounder is a tank killer. Rost knows he made a calculated risk by taking out the lead tank first to block the road, leaving the most dangerous gun operational. Now, he must rectify that tactical gamble before the British gunner finds his mark. Traverse left 10 o'clock, Firefly moving in the field. Rost barks the order into his throat mic, his voice calm but urgent. The hydraulic traverse mechanism whines as the turret begins to rotate slowly to the left. The Tiger's turret rotation is notoriously slow compared to the American tanks. Dependent on the engine's RPM for speed, Richter pushes the foot pedal for the power traverse, willing the massive gun to swing faster. Every second that ticks by is a second the Firefly has to settle its suspension, aim, and fire. It is a mechanical race, gear tooth against gear tooth, determined by the quality of engineering and the nerves of the men operating it. Inside the hull, the radio operator, Friedrich, is busy with the hull machine gun. He can see panicked infantrymen dismounting from the rear of the column, scrambling into the ditches with rifles and bazookas. He pulls the charging handle of the MG-34, the bolt sliding home with a crisp snap. He peers through his telescopic sight, searching for the telltale shapes of anti-tank teams. The Tiger is vulnerable to close-quarters infantry attacks, and it is his job to keep the enemy soldiers pinned down while the main gun deals with the armor. He fires a short, controlled burst, the brass casings cascading into a canvas bag beneath the gun to prevent them from rolling under the driver's feet. The heat inside the tank is becoming oppressive. The combination of the engine's heat radiating through the firewall, the friction of the mechanical components, and the body heat of 5 terrified men turns the interior into an oven. Sweat runs freely down their faces, stinging their eyes and soaking their uniforms. The leather pads on the headsets become slick and uncomfortable. There is no fresh air, only the recycled, smoky atmosphere that tastes of oil and fear. Yet, despite the physical discomfort, the crew operates with a cold, detached efficiency. They are part of the machine now, their biological functions secondary to the mechanical needs of the tank. Richter finally catches the silhouette of the Firefly in his sights. The enemy tank is moving erratically over the uneven ground of the field, its long gun bobbing up and down. Shooting on the move is difficult for the Shermans, so the British driver stops the tank abruptly to give his gunner a stable platform. This is the moment Richter has been waiting for. The sudden halt causes the Sherman to rock forward on its suspension. Richter tracks the movement, his hands making microscopic adjustments to the elevation wheel. He needs to hit the turret ring or the hull. A hit on the sloped glacis plate might glance off. Even with the 88's power, steady, Rost whispers, watching the Firefly through his binoculars. He can see the muzzle brake of the enemy gun pointing directly at them. It looks like a black eye staring back at him. The psychological pressure is immense. They are looking down the barrel of a weapon designed specifically to kill them. Rost trusts his armor, but he knows physics is a cruel mistress. A direct hit from that 17-pounder could punch through the driver's plate or the turret front, turning the interior into a blender of shrapnel and molten metal. He forces himself to breathe, to remain the calm anchor for his crew amidst the rising storm of violence. Braun stands ready with the next shell cradled in his arms, watching the recoil guard intently. He knows that as soon as Richter fires, the gun will come leaping back at him. He positions his body carefully, bracing his hip against the turret ring and keeping his legs clear of the recoil path. The floor is becoming slippery with oil and sweat, making footing treacherous. A slip at the wrong moment could mean a crushed limb or a delayed reload, costing them their lives. He watches Richter's back, reading the tension in the gunner's shoulders, waiting for the sudden lurch that signals the release of destruction. Suddenly, a hammer blow strikes the front of the Tiger. The sound is not an explosion but a colossal, ringing clang that vibrates through every atom of the steel structure. The tank shudders violently, and dust falls from the ceiling. One of the other Shermans has found its range and landed a hit on the frontal armor. The shell shatters harmlessly against the 100mm thick hardened steel, gouging a deep scar but failing to penetrate. The crew is shaken but unharmed. The reality of their invulnerability against the standard Sherman guns is confirmed, boosting their confidence even as the concussion leaves their ears ringing. Front armor hit. No penetration, Hans reports from the driver's seat, his voice shaky but triumphant. He felt the impact reverberate through the steering wheel, a physical connection to the enemy's violence. The Tiger is doing exactly what it was designed to do, absorb punishment that would destroy a lesser vehicle. But Rost knows this game of chance cannot last forever. The Firefly is the wild card, the one variable that can change the equation instantly. They have shrugged off a jab, But the knockout punch is still waiting in the field to their left, loaded in the breech of the British tank. Richter ignores the impact. His concentration absolute. He has the Firefly in his crosshairs. The enemy tank has stopped rocking and is settling for its shot. It is a duel of split seconds. Richter takes a half breath, holds it, and squeezes the firing pedal. The electrical circuit closes. The primer ignites. And for the second time in a minute, the Tiger Eye roars its defiance. The gun recoils. The breech opens, and the cycle of mechanical violence begins anew. The outcome of the shot flying downrange faster than the crew can blink. The armor-piercing projectile screams across the open meadow, slicing through the air with a terrifying shriek that lasts for less than a heartbeat. Richter watches through his telescopic sight, expecting to see the violent sparks of steel striking steel, but fate intervenes in the form of the uneven French terrain. At the precise moment of the trigger pull, the British Firefly had dipped its nose into a shallow drainage ditch, lowering its profile by mere inches. The German shell, moving at supersonic speed, skims just over the top of the Firefly's turret, the shockwave tearing the canvas, camouflage netting from the enemy barrel, but failing to make contact with the hard armor. The round detonates in the ancient oak trees behind the British position, showering the battlefield with splintered wood and dirt. Miss Shot over Rost screams into the intercom, his voice cracking with the intensity of the moment. The failure to eliminate the primary threat instantly shifts the tactical advantage dangerously toward the enemy. The Firefly is now fully stopped, its suspension settling, and its long 17-pounder gun is traversing steadily toward the Tiger's position. Rost knows they have seconds before the British gunner finds his mark. The hunter has missed his opening lunge, and now the prey is biting back with lethal intent. The commander's eyes dart to the other 3 Shermans, which are now accelerating wildly, their engines roaring as they fan out to create a kill box around the German tank. Inside the Tiger, the mood shifts from predatory focus to frantic survival instinct. Richter curses under his breath, a stream of invective directed at himself and the unpredictable ground. He furiously spins the elevation wheel, trying to bring the gun down to correct for the miss. But the Firefly is already obscured by the smoke of its own muzzle blast. The British tank fires. A tongue of flame erupts from the long barrel in the distance. There is no sound of flight, only the instantaneous, sledgehammer impact of the shot arriving. The shell strikes the ground 5 meters in front of the Tiger, gouging a massive crater in the earth and showering the driver's vision block with wet, heavy mud. Driver. Reverse, backup angle left Rost commands, realizing that sitting still is now suicide. Hans stomps on the clutch and wrestles the gear lever into reverse. The transmission grinds in protest before the gears mesh, and the 57-ton giant lurches backward. The tracks claw at the earth, dragging the tank deeper into the shadows of the hedgerow. Rost is trying to use the vegetation as a screen, breaking the line of sight with the lethal Firefly while presenting the thickest frontal armor to the other advancing tanks. The tactical situation has dissolved into a brawl. A close-quarters knife fight played out with heavy machinery. Braun is a machine in human form, his movements blurred by adrenaline and repetition. He has already ejected the spent casing from the missed shot and is ramming a fresh shell into the breech before the tank has even finished its backward lurch. The floor of the turret is becoming a hazard, slick with oil and cluttered with hot brass casings that roll around with every movement of the vehicle. He kicks them aside violently, clearing a path for his feet. The air is growing hotter, the ventilation fan struggling to clear the dense white smoke that hangs in the upper turret like a shroud. Braun coughs, his lungs burning, but he shouts up with undiminished ferocity. Rost scans the field through the periscopes, his mind processing the chaotic geometry of the battle. The Firefly is reloading and obscured by smoke, but to his right, one of the standard Shermans has made a bold decision. It is charging across the open ground, closing the distance rapidly to bring its 75mm gun into effective range. The American commander is gambling that the Tiger is too distracted by the Firefly to notice the flanker. It is a brave maneuver, but it exposes the Sherman's side to the German gun if Richter can traverse fast enough. Rost identifies the new threat immediately. A hit from the side, even from a smaller gun, could disable their tracks or engine. New target, 2 o'clock, Moving tank, range 300, Rost's orders cut through the noise. Richter abandons his duel with the invisible Firefly and swings the turret to the right. The hydraulic traverse whines at a higher pitch as the heavy turret rotates. Richter fights against the momentum of the tank's own movement, his eyes glued to the optics. The rushing Sherman fills his field of view. Growing larger by the second, it is bouncing over the ruts, its gun stabilized only by the skill of its driver. Richter needs to lead the target, calculating the speed of the enemy vehicle and the flight time of his shell in a split second. The Sherman fires on the move. A desperate shot meant to suppress the German crew. The shell strikes the Tiger's frontal glacis plate with a deafening clang, ricocheting upwards and shearing off the hull machine gun mount. Sparks cascade over the front of the tank like a welding torch. Friedrich, the radio operator, ducks instinctively as the periscope above his head shatters, raining glass onto his console. "I'm blind, optic gone," he yells. But his voice is lost in the roar of the battle. The hit was non-penetrating, but it serves as a violent reminder of the volume of fire being directed at them. The Tiger is an anvil, and the hammers are falling from all sides. Richter ignores the impact, his world narrowing down to the crosshairs and the moving olive-drab shape. He tracks the Sherman smoothly, matching its velocity. He anticipates the enemy tank's path, aiming for the center of mass where the ammunition is stored. His breathing is shallow and controlled, a stark contrast to the chaos erupting around him. He is the calm eye of the storm, the instrument of destruction. He waits for the Sherman to crest a small rise, exposing its lower hull. It is a grim patience, born of years of war on the Eastern Front. As the Sherman rises, exposing its suspension and side armor, Richter crushes the firing pedal. The 88mm gun thunders again, a sound that dominates the battlefield. The muzzle brake directs the blast sideways, flattening the grass for 20 meters on either side of the tank. The recoil is violent, rocking the massive vehicle back on its suspension. The armor-piercing shell bridges the 300-meter gap instantly. It strikes the rushing Sherman just above the second road wheel, punching through the thinner side armor with terrifying ease. The kinetic energy of the impact is transferred entirely into the enemy machine, bringing its forward momentum to a shuddering, violent halt. For a split second, the Sherman sits motionless, a smoking hole in its flank. Then, the physics of the catastrophic penetration take over. The ammunition storage inside the American tank ignites. A column of brilliant white flame erupts from the commander's hatch, shooting 50 feet into the air like a geyser. The turret is lifted bodily from the hull by the force of the internal explosion, flipping into the air and crashing down onto the engine deck with a bone-shaking crash. The violence of the destruction is absolute. There are no survivors from the crew. The machine has become their pyre in the blink of an eye. Target destroyed, Rost confirms, though the confirmation is unnecessary given the pillar of fire now burning in the field. The destruction of the flanking tank sends a shockwave of hesitation through the remaining Allied forces. The other two standard Shermans break hard, popping smoke grenades and reversing frantically toward the cover of the tree line. They have seen what the 88 can do to their armor, and the bravado of the charge evaporates instantly. The Tiger has reasserted its dominance, proving that even outnumbered, it is the apex predator of this concrete jungle. But the victory is fleeting. The burning wreck of the Sherman now adds to the visual obstruction of the battlefield. Thick black smoke drifting across the firing lanes. Rost knows they have bought themselves only a moment of respite. The Firefly is still out there, somewhere behind the veil of smoke, and its commander is undoubtedly using this distraction to maneuver for a kill shot. The British crew knows exactly where the Tiger is, and they possess the weapon to end this fight with a single round. The duel is far from over. It has merely entered a deadlier, more stalking phase. Inside the turret, the atmosphere is heavy with heat and exhaustion. Braun is panting, sweat dripping from his nose onto the floor plates. He reaches for another shell, his arms screaming in protest at the repetitive strain of lifting the heavy munitions. "Ammo count?" Rost asks, his voice tight. 20 rounds AP remaining, Braun replies, his voice hoarse. They have plenty of ammunition, but their endurance is finite. The cordite fumes are making them lightheaded, and the dehydration is setting in. They are fighting a war on two fronts, one against the enemy tanks outside, and one against the physical limits of their own bodies inside the steel oven. Hans, down in the driver's seat, wipes the grime from his face with a greasy rag. The engine temperature gauge is creeping into the red zone. The constant shifting, reversing, and pivoting in the heavy soil is straining the cooling system to its limit. If the engine overheats and seizes, they are dead men. He adjusts the cooling fans to maximum, praying the belts hold together. He can feel the heat radiating through the seatback, searing his uniform. He is trapped in a metal box with a bomb behind him and enemy shells hammering the front. Yet his hands remain steady on the wheel, awaiting the next command. Rost takes a moment to assess their position. They have destroyed 2 tanks, the lead Sherman and the flanker. 3 remain, the 2 retreating standard Shermans and the deadly Firefly. The odds have improved, but the most dangerous piece on the board is still in play. He knows the Firefly commander will not make the same mistake twice. The next time they show themselves, the British gunner will be waiting. Rost decides they cannot stay in this static position. The smoke from their own gun and the burning wrecks marks their location perfectly for enemy artillery or air support. They must move, and they must hunt down the Firefly before it hunts them. Driver, advance slowly. Follow the hedge line. We need a new firing angle. Rost orders. The Tiger shudders as it begins to crawl forward, its wide tracks crushing the bushes and small trees. Rost keeps his eyes glued to the periscope, scanning the breaks in the smoke for the distinctive long barrel of their nemesis. The psychological weight of the duel is immense. It is a game of cat and mouse played with high explosive shells, where the first mistake is usually the last. The thunder of the 88 has cleared the immediate area, but the silence that follows is even more terrifying than the noise of the guns. As the Tiger creeps forward, the burning Sherman casts a flickering, hellish light over the interior of the German tank through the vision slits. The crew works in the glow of the enemy's destruction, a grim reminder of their own potential fate. Rost checks his map, verifying their coordinates. They are alone, kilometers ahead of their support lines, fighting a delaying action to buy time for the division to regroup. Every minute they hold this road is a minute gained for the retreat. But Rost is not thinking about strategy now. He is thinking about angles, armor thickness, and the location of that 17-pounder gun. The stage is set for the next confrontation. The remaining Shermans are suppressed, licking their wounds in the distance. But the Firefly is the phantom in the field. Rost knows that to survive, they must do the unthinkable. They must leave the relative safety of their ambush position and aggressively close the distance, forcing the British tank to fight on the Tiger's terms. It is a gamble that defies the manual. But in the chaos of the bocage, the manual is used for kindling. The Tiger rolls on, its engine growling low and deep, moving toward the smoke and the inevitable final showdown. The thick, oily smoke from the burning Sherman rolls across the sunken lane like a funeral shroud, momentarily blinding both hunter and prey. Inside Tiger 231, Obersturmführer Karl Rost ignores the spectacle of the destruction he has just wrought. His mind is entirely consumed by the one variable that remains unsolved, the Sherman Firefly. He knows the British crew operating that tank is not idle. They are veterans, likely repositioning right now to find a firing line that bypasses the Tiger's heavy frontal armor. The Firefly is the only predator in this valley capable of ripping the Tiger apart from long range, and every second it remains unaccounted for is a second closer to death. Rost scans the breaks in the smoke, his binoculars trembling slightly in his grip as the adrenaline begins to sour into a cold, knotting dread in his stomach. Driver, hard left, get us off the road. Into the orchard, Rost barks the order, his voice tight with urgency. He knows that staying on the road, the bowling alley, is a tactical error now that their position is known. They need to become a moving target, to disappear into the labyrinth of the bocage and force the enemy to fight a confused, close-quarters battle where the Tiger's armor is most effective. Hans responds instantly, hauling the left steering lever back with both hands. The left track locks, digging a deep trench into the macadam, while the right track continues to drive, pivoting the massive 57-ton hull with a groan of tortured metal. The Tiger smashes through the dense hawthorn hedge bordering the road, the vegetation snapping like dry kindling against the steel glacis. The tank lurches violently as it drops into the field beyond, the suspension bottoming out with a bone-jarring crash that throws the crew against their restraints. They are now in an apple orchard, the gnarled trees providing a canopy of dappled sunlight and shadow that breaks up the tank's outline perfectly. However, the orchard is a double-edged sword. The low-hanging branches scrape loudly against the turret roof and snag on the cupola, limiting Rost's visibility to a mere 50 meters. It is a claustrophobic green hell, where an enemy tank could be lurking behind any row of trees. Invisible until the muzzle flash, the engine roar seems muffled here, absorbed by the heavy summer foliage, creating an eerie, insulated atmosphere of tension. Turret, 10 o'clock. Keep scanning. He's out here, Rost whispers, though he knows the enemy cannot hear him. He commands Richter to traverse the gun, sweeping the dark spaces between the tree trunks. The electric traverse motor whines softly, a mechanical counterpoint to the thrumming of the idling engine. Richter is sweating profusely, his eye pressed so hard against the rubber eyepiece of the sight that it is beginning to bruise. He knows that in this terrain, the engagement ranges will be point-blank, if the Firefly sees them first. The high-velocity 17-pounder shell will not just penetrate. At this range, it will likely go straight through the tank, taking the crew with it. Friedrich, the radio operator, is hunched over his machine gun in the hull, but his primary utility now is his extra set of eyes. He peers through his vision block, scanning the lower level of the orchard where the tree trunks might reveal the distinct bogey wheels of a Sherman. Movement. Left side shadows moving, he calls out suddenly, his voice spiking with panic. Rost spins his periscope to the left, through the swaying branches. He catches a glimpse of movement, not a tank, but the displacement of a small sapling being crushed by something heavy. The Firefly is stalking them, moving parallel to their course, trying to flank them through the adjacent field. The game has shifted from a static ambush to a mobile hunt, a lethal version of hide-and-seek played with 30-ton machines. Rost realizes the British commander is trying to circle behind them to get a shot at the Tiger's thinner rear armor, where the engine bay is vulnerable. If they succeed, a single round will ignite the fuel tanks and roast the crew alive. Driver. Pivot left, face the threat, full speed, Rost yells. He cannot let the Firefly get behind him. He must turn the Tiger's thick face toward the danger, even if it means exposing his side to the remaining standard Shermans that might be lurking elsewhere. The Firefly is the priority. Everything else is a distraction. Hans revs the engine to its limit, the Maybach V12 screaming as he executes a neutral turn. The tracks churn the orchard soil into a slurry of mud and grass. Apple trees are uprooted and crushed under the treads as the tank spins on its axis. The violence of the maneuver is terrified and aggressive. Inside the turret, the centrifugal force pulls at the crew, dragging them sideways. Braun, the loader, struggles to keep his balance, hugging a fresh 88mm shell to his chest to keep it from tumbling. He knows he must be ready to load the instant the gun fires, regardless of the chaos of the tank's movement. As the Tiger completes its turn, the thick foliage ahead parts, revealed by the crushing weight of the enemy tank breaking cover. The Firefly emerges from the tree line just 150 meters away. It is a terrifying sight. The long barrel of the 17-pounder looks disproportionately large on the Sherman chassis, a lance designed to kill giants. The British tank is coated in dust, its camouflage netting torn, looking like a battered prizefighter. For a split second, both commanders stare at each other across the gap, the realization of mutual discovery freezing time. The Firefly is slightly angled, its turret frantically traversing to bring the gun to bear on the Tiger. Target front, Firefly, halt, Rost screams, the command tearing from his throat. Hans slams on the brakes, the sudden stop rocking the tank forward on its suspension. This rocking motion is the gunner's nightmare, as it throws the aim off vertically. Richter fights the optics, waiting for the reticle to settle. He can see the muzzle brake of the Firefly swinging toward them. It is a race of mechanics and nerves. The Firefly's turret is faster, lighter, and it is already halfway onto the target. Rost knows they are seconds away from taking a hit. He braces himself against the cupola ring, watching the black hole of the enemy barrel align with his face. The Firefly fires first. A blinding flash erupts from the long gun, and the Tiger is struck with a force that defies description. The shell impacts the thick gun mantlet of the Tiger, just inches to the right of the main gun. The sound is not a bang, but a sharp, cracking whip crack that leaves the crew stunned and gasping. The tank shudders as if kicked by a god. Inside, the lights flicker and die, plunging the crew into gloom, illuminated only by the daylight streaming through the vision slits. Rost checks his body instantly. He is alive. The tank is not burning. The shell, likely a specialized discarding sabot round, has shattered against the curved, reinforced steel of the mantlet, failing to bite into the armor at the oblique angle. Report status. Rost yells, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. Gun functional optics clear, Richter responds, his voice shaky but professional. The German optics are legendary for their durability, and despite the concussion, the Zeiss sight has held its zero. The British gunner, perhaps rushing his shot in the face of the terrifying Tiger, has missed the kill zone by a fraction of a degree. The deflection has saved them, but they will not get a second reprieve. The Firefly is already reloading, its loader frantically shoving another long casing into the breech. The Tiger has a window of perhaps 6 seconds before the next round comes flying down range. Fire. Kill him. Rost doesn't need to give coordinates. The target is filling the windshield. Richter has already recovered from the shock of the impact. The image of the Firefly is seared into his vision. The enemy tank is stationary now, the crew likely paralyzed by the realization that their best shot has bounced off the German monster. Richter aligns the triangle of his sight with the center of the Firefly's upper hull, just below the turret ring. He doesn't bother with fine adjustments. At this range, the 88 shoots as flat as a laser beam. He presses the pedal, channeling all his fear and rage into the electrical switch. The Tiger roars, the recoil more violent than ever in the confined space of the orchard. The muzzle blast shreds the leaves off the surrounding trees, creating a sudden autumn shower of green. The 88mm armor-piercing capped shell leaves the barrel at 800 meters per second. It covers the short distance in an instant, striking the Firefly dead center on the vertical plate protecting the driver. The impact is catastrophic. The Sherman's armor, designed to stop lower-velocity shells, stands no chance against the point-blank kinetic energy of the Tiger's main gun. The shell punches through the steel like a finger through wet clay. There is no dramatic fireball this time, only a gruesome, shuddering halt to the enemy machine. The Firefly seems to jump slightly in the air as the energy is transferred, then settles heavily on its suspension. A thin wisp of blue smoke curls lazily from the commander's hatch, followed seconds later by a tongue of flame licking up from the engine vents. The internal damage is absolute. The shell has likely passed through the fighting compartment and shattered the engine block, blending man and machine into a single ruin. The threat of the 17-pounder has been extinguished, silenced by the brute force of German engineering. Target neutralized. Richter breathes, slumping back in his seat. The adrenaline crash hits him instantly, making his hands tremble uncontrollably. He wipes the sweat from his eyes, leaving streaks of grease on his face. The interior of the Tiger is silent for a moment, save for the heavy breathing of the 5 men and the ticking of the cooling metal. They have survived the duel with their nemesis. They have taken the best punch the Allies could throw and remained standing. A grim sense of invincibility begins to creep back into their minds, a dangerous cocktail of relief and arrogance. Good shooting, Rost says, his voice flat. He does not celebrate. He knows the battle is not over. The destruction of the Firefly has removed the sharpest tooth from the enemy bite, but the remaining Shermans are still out there. They will have heard the exchange, and they will know the Firefly is gone. They will be desperate now, perhaps terrified, or perhaps emboldened by the knowledge that the Tiger is alone and potentially damaged. Rost looks at the gouge on the mantlet through his periscope, a deep, silver scar in the camouflage paint where death had knocked and been turned away. Driver. Reverse. Get us back to the road. We need to reset. Rost orders. He wants to drag the Tiger back to a position of strength, using the burning wrecks of the first 2 Shermans as a barrier. But as Hans shifts into reverse, the radio crackles to life with a burst of static, followed by a frantic warning from Friedrich in the hull. Infantry right flank bazookas. The spell of the tank duel is broken. The Allied infantry, moving up under the cover of the tank battle, has infiltrated the orchard. The Tiger, king of the armor duel, is now vulnerable to the smallest soldiers on the field. Rost spins the cupola to the right. He sees them shapes moving low in the tall grass, carrying the distinct stovepipe tubes of anti-tank rocket launchers. They are closing in, trying to get within the lethal 30-meter range. Machine gun! Suppress them! Rost yells, grabbing the MP-40 submachine gun stowed near his hatch. He pops the hatch open just an inch. Firing blind bursts into the grass to keep the heads down. The Tiger is a fortress. But even fortresses can be stormed. They have killed the dragon. But now they are being swarmed by the ants. The engine roars as Hans tries to back the tank out of the soft soil of the orchard, the tracks slipping on the crushed apples and mud. The Tiger feels sluggish, heavy, as if the earth itself is trying to claim it. Rost knows they must get back to the hard surface of the lane. They have won the duel of the guns. But the chaotic, messy brawl of the infantry battle is just beginning. The Firefly is dead. But the war is still very much alive, and it is closing in from all sides. The retreat from the orchard is a frantic, grinding affair. The Tiger's wide tracks slipping dangerously on the slick slurry of crushed apples and wet mud. Obersturmführer Rost stays buttoned up in the cupola, ducking instinctively as the distinctive whoosh of a bazooka rocket passes inches over the turret roof. The shaped charge detonates against a tree trunk 10 meters away, showering the hull with splinters and dirt. Friedrich, the radio operator, keeps the bow machine gun chattering, spraying the tall grass blindly to suppress the American infantry teams, crawling toward them like ants. Hans wrestles the steering levers, the massive engine screaming in protest as he forces the 57-ton beast backward, smashing through the hedgerow again and slamming onto the hard surface of the sunken lane with a chassis-shaking thud. Just as the tracks bite into the gravel of the road, the world inside the Tiger ends in a thunderclap. A high-explosive shell from the 4th Sherman, which had been waiting silently near a stone barn down the road, strikes the side of the Tiger's turret. The impact does not penetrate the 80mm side armor, but the physics of the collision are terrifying. The shell detonates on contact, transmitting a colossal shockwave through the steel plates. The hull rings like a gigantic church bell struck by a titan's hammer, a deafening, vibrating resonance that instantly incapacitates the crew. For a few seconds, there is no sound, only a high-pitched, screaming whine in their ears and the sensation of their brains rattling inside their skulls. Rost is thrown violently against the commander's hatch, his helmet colliding with the vision blocks. He collapses into the seat, stars bursting in his vision, blood trickling from his nose where a vessel has burst from the concussion. The interior lights shatter, raining glass onto the floor plates, plunging the fighting compartment into a gloomy twilight illuminated only by the sparks of the electrical system shorting out. Dust, centuries old and dislodged from the crevices of the tank, fills the air instantly, coating everything in a grey film. Richter, the gunner, is slumped over his sight, his forehead bleeding from striking the brow pad, groaning in a daze as he tries to remember where he is. "Sound off," report Rost croaks, but he cannot hear his own voice over the ringing in his ears. He shakes his head violently, trying to clear the fog. He kicks the gunner's seat, a crude method of waking his crew. Richter stirs, his survival instinct cutting through the concussion. He grabs the hand wheels of the traverse mechanism, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Down in the hull, Hans is wrestling with the controls, shouting that the steering feels loose. The impact or the earlier bazooka fire has damaged a track pin or a road wheel, and the tank is pulling hard to the right, fighting his inputs. They are wounded, deafened, and partially crippled, sitting ducks on an open road. The 4th Sherman, emboldened by the hit, fires again. This time, the shell strikes the lower hull, shattering a spare track link bolted to the front armor. The impact rocks the Tiger back on its suspension, jarring the crew's teeth. The American commander is hammering them, trying to crack the nut through sheer brute force. Rost forces himself up to the periscope, wiping the blood from his eyes. He spots the enemy muzzle flash through the dust. The Sherman is less than 200 meters away, partially hull down behind a pile of rubble. It is firing rapidly, seeking a weak point, hammering away at the German giant with a terrifying rhythm. "Target front rubble pile, shoot him!" Rost screams, his voice tearing at his throat. Richter shakes the blood out of his eyes and forces his face back into the optic. The glass is cracked, a spiderweb fracture obscuring the lower left quadrant of the view. But the center is clear. He can see the Sherman. It is firing high-explosive rounds, trying to blind them or disable their gun barrel. Richter's hands are slippery with sweat and blood, struggling to grip the Bakelite wheels. He spins the turret, the hydraulic system whining in protest as if it too is in pain. He aligns the crosshairs on the center of the enemy muzzle flash, operating on pure, drilled instinct. Braun, the loader, is the unsung hero of this chaotic moment. Despite the concussion leaving him nauseous and dizzy, he is already moving. The floor is a treacherous skating rink of hydraulic fluid and spent brass casings. He stumbles, cracking his shin against the firewall. But he does not stop. He grabs an 88mm shell from the ready rack. The 20-pound projectile feeling like it weighs a ton. His muscles burn with lactic acid, and his lungs gasp for air that isn't there, choking on the thick cordite fumes that hang in the turret like a poisonous fog. He slams the shell into the breech, the heavy steel block snapping shut and nearly taking his fingers with it. "Up," he screams, his voice a ragged gasp. Richter does not hesitate. As soon as he hears the loader's signal, he crushes the firing pedal. The Tiger's main gun recoils, the breech block sliding back inches from Braun's chest. The blast clears the dust from the road instantly. The shell strikes the fourth Sherman just as it is preparing to fire again. The German round hits the gun mantlet of the American tank, smashing through the mechanism and penetrating the turret face. The kinetic transfer is absolute. The Sherman's turret is wrenched sideways by the force of the impact, the gun barrel pointing uselessly at the sky. A second later, the ammunition inside cooks off, sending a jet of flame shooting out of the hatches. The destruction of the fourth tank brings a momentary, stunning silence to the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of burning metal and the heavy, laboring idle of the Tiger's engine. Inside the German tank, the crew collapses into their positions, gasping for breath. The heat is indescribable, easily exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Their uniforms are soaked through, sticking to their skin like wet paste. The air smells of burnt propellant, hot oil, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of blood. They are exhausted beyond measure, their bodies pushed to the absolute limit of endurance. Yet they are still alive. "Status check," Rost whispers, unable to shout anymore. Hans reports from the driver's hole, his voice sounding distant and tinny through the damaged intercom. "Right track is damaged. We have thrown a pin. I can move, but no sharp turns, or we lose the track completely." This is critical news. The Tiger is now a limping beast. If they lose the track, they become a stationary pillbox, easily flanked and destroyed. They have mobility, but it is fragile. Rost processes this information with a cold, detached logic. They cannot run. They must finish this fight here, or die here. Rost does a mental head count of the enemy. 4 tanks are burning wrecks scattered across the landscape, the lead on the bridge, the flanker in the field, the firefly in the orchard, and now the ambusher in the barn. That leaves one, the 5th Sherman, the one that was at the rear of the column. Rost scans the battlefield, rotating the periscope 360 degrees. There is no sign of it. The 5th tank has vanished. This is more terrifying than seeing it. The American commander has seen his 4 platoon mates destroyed and has chosen not to flee, but to go silent. He is stalking them. "Loader, clear the floor. Gunner, scan right. Driver, inch us forward. We need to clear the smoke." Rost orders. Braun kicks the hot brass casings out the rear hatch, clearing a working space. He is trembling, his hands shaking so badly he can barely grip the next shell. He looks at his hands. They are black with grease and soot, the knuckles raw and bleeding. He grabs a canteen of water and takes a swig of the warm, metallic-tasting liquid, swishing it around his mouth to clear the grit before swallowing. It offers little relief, but it focuses his mind. He is ready for one more round. The Tiger creeps forward, the damaged track clicking loudly with every rotation of the sprocket. Click-clack, click-clack. It is a rhythmic announcement of their injury. Rost leans out of the cupola for a split second to get a better view, risking a sniper's bullet. The smoke from the burning Sherman is drifting across the road, creating a thick grey wall. Somewhere behind that wall, or perhaps flanking through the fields on either side, the last survivor is waiting. Rost knows that the final adversary is often the most dangerous, for he has had the time to watch, to learn, and to plan his strike while the tiger was distracted. The psychological toll is mounting. The crew is jumpy, reacting to every shadow and shifting branch. Richter's eye is swollen shut from the impact, so he is aiming with his non-dominant eye, forcing him to twist his head at an awkward angle. The machinery is tired, the engine temperature hovering in the red zone. The tiger is bleeding oil and coolant, a wounded dragon surrounded by the corpses of its enemies. Rost settles back into his seat, gripping the hatch ring. He knows the end of this engagement is near. It will be decided in the next few minutes, likely by whoever sees the other first. Suddenly, Friedrich shouts from the hull. Engine noise, rear behind us. The blood drains from Rost's face. The 5th Sherman has used the chaos and the noise of the last engagement to execute a wide flanking maneuver. It hasn't retreated. It has circled the entire battlefield. It is now approaching their rear, where the armor is thinnest. The Tiger's slow turret rotation speed and damaged track make turning to face this new threat a near impossible task. The hunter has been outmaneuvered. The final act of the duel begins not with a bang, but with the terrifying roar of a radial engine closing in from the blind side. Pivot hard, right, spin it around, Rost screams the order, his voice cracking with the sheer desperation of the moment. He knows they are exposing their damaged track to lethal stress, but the alternative is a 75mm shell crashing through the thin armor of the engine bay. Down in the driver's compartment, Hans grits his teeth and slams the right steering lever back while flooring the accelerator. The Tiger groans in mechanical agony, the engine howling as it fights to spin 57 tons of steel on a dime. The damaged track pops and grinds ominously, the metal pins shrieking under the torque, threatening to snap and leave them stranded in the kill zone. As the heavy hull begins its sluggish rotation, the 5th Sherman bursts from the cover of the smoke behind them. The American tank is moving at top speed, its suspension bouncing violently as it charges across the uneven ground. The commander of the Sherman is gambling everything on speed, trying to close the distance and plant a shell in the Tiger's rear before the German gun can traverse. It is a terrifying sight, 30 tons of olive-drab steel rushing forward like a battering ram, its gun barrel stabilized and pointing directly at the Tiger's exhaust mufflers. The distance is closing so fast that Rost can see the mud caked on the enemy's tracks. Richter is fighting a losing battle with the turret traverse mechanism. The hydraulic system, dependent on the engine's RPM, is sluggish as the tank pivots. "Faster, faster!" he yells, his hand spinning the manual assist wheel so hard his knuckles turn white. The barrel of the 88 is swinging around, but it feels like it is moving through molasses compared to the agile American tank. Richter watches the Sherman through his peripheral vision, knowing that if the enemy fires now, the shell will penetrate the engine compartment, igniting the fuel tanks and turning the Tiger into a crematorium for the 5 men inside. The Sherman fires on the move, a desperate snapshot taken from less than 50 meters away. The shell strikes the rear corner of the Tiger's hull just as it completes the first half of its pivot. The impact rips away the armored exhaust cover and shatters the heavy cast-iron muffler, sending a cloud of soot and metal fragments into the air. The tank shudders violently, but the angle of the pivot saves them. The projectile glances off the corner plate instead of penetrating the engine block, ricocheting harmlessly into the dirt. The Tiger is wounded, trailing black smoke from the damaged exhaust, but its heart is still beating. "Infantry! They're rushing us!" Friedrich screams from the hull gunner's position. Behind the charging Sherman, a squad of American infantrymen has broken cover, sprinting toward the German tank with satchel charges and bazookas. They are trying to take advantage of the chaos to get close enough to disable the tracks. Friedrich pulls the trigger on his MG-34, sweeping the area in front of the tank with a stream of 7.92mm bullets. The tracers stitch a deadly line across the grass, forcing the infantry to dive for cover. He fires in short, controlled bursts, creating a wall of lead that separates the enemy soldiers from their steel quarry. The Tiger finally completes its violent pivot, bringing the thick frontal armor to bear on the enemy. The maneuver has placed the Sherman in a deadly predicament. The American tank, having rushed forward to hit the rear, now finds itself staring down the barrel of the 88 at point-blank range. The American driver slams on the brakes, trying to reverse, but the momentum carries the Sherman forward, sliding on the wet grass. For a brief second, the entire side profile of the Sherman is exposed to Richter's sights, a flat, vertical slab of steel that offers zero protection against the German heavy gun. Richter does not need to aim carefully at this range. He could hit the target with his eyes closed. The grey shape of the Sherman fills the entire optic. "Got him," he whispers, a cold finality in his voice. He presses the firing pedal one last time. The 88 roars, the muzzle blast so close to the ground that it tears up the turf and flattens the nearby bushes. The recoil throws the crew back into their seats, the violence of the shot shaking the last vestiges of dust from the ceiling of the turret. The shell bridges the gap instantly, striking the Sherman just below the turret ring. The result is catastrophic. The armor-piercing shell punches through the Sherman's side as if it were made of cardboard. It detonates inside the fighting compartment, setting off the ammunition storage immediately. The turret of the Sherman is blown clean off the hull, flipping into the air in a somersault of fire and steel before crashing upside down on the grass. A massive fireball engulfs the chassis, accompanied by a series of secondary explosions that rip the wreck apart. The brave charge of the final tank ends in total annihilation, leaving only a burning pyre to mark its failure. "Target destroyed, cease fire," Rost commands, his voice hoarse and barely audible over the ringing in his ears. The interior of the Tiger is filled with a dense, choking silence that feels heavier than the noise of battle. The engine is still running, but it sounds rough, coughing and sputtering due to the damage to the exhaust system. The crew sits motionless for a moment, their chests heaving, their faces masked in soot and sweat. They are alive. Against all odds, they have survived the ambush, defeated 5 enemy tanks, and held their ground. The adrenaline begins to fade, replaced by a crushing wave of exhaustion that seeps into their bones. Hans releases his grip on the steering levers, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He leans his forehead against the vision block, staring out at the burning wreck of the Sherman just 50 meters away. The heat from the fire is palpable even through the thick armor glass. He realizes how close they came to death. If he had pivoted a second later, or if the track had snapped during the turn, they would be the ones burning right now. The margin between victory and death was measured in millimeters and milliseconds. He whispers a quiet prayer, thanking the machine that protected them. Braun, the loader, slides to the floor of the turret, ignoring the hot brass casings scattered around him. He pulls a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his pocket, his shaking fingers struggling to extract one. He lights it with a Zippo lighter, taking a deep drag and letting the smoke fill his lungs. It is a small comfort, a reminder of normalcy in a world of madness. "Any more?" he asks, gesturing vaguely toward the vision slits. "No," Rost replies, scanning the horizon with his binoculars. The field is clear. The infantry is retreating. The destruction of their armor support has broken the morale of the enemy foot soldiers, sending them fleeing back to the safety of the tree line. Rost opens the commander's hatch slowly, pushing it up against the spring. He cautiously raises his head out of the cupola, taking his first breath of fresh air in over an hour. The air outside is cool compared to the oven-like interior of the tank, but it is tainted with the heavy, sickening smell of burning rubber, diesel, and roasted meat. He looks around the battlefield. It is a graveyard of armor. 5 pillars of black smoke rise into the summer sky, marking the resting places of the 5 Shermans. The bocage is quiet again, save for the crackling of the fires and the distant rumble of the front line. He climbs out onto the turret roof, his boots crunching on the debris scattered across the steel surface. He walks to the rear of the tank to inspect the damage. The exhaust system is a mangled ruin of twisted metal, hanging loosely from the hull. The rear armor plate is gouged and scarred from shrapnel. He looks down at the tracks, The right track is dangerously loose. A pin working its way out. They are mobile, but only just. They need repairs, fuel, and ammunition before they can fight again. But for now, they are the masters of this sunken lane. Rost taps the turret roof with his boot, signaling the crew that it is safe to emerge. One by one, they climb out of the hatches. Hans, Friedrich, Richter, and Braun. They stand on the engine deck, looking like coal miners emerging from a collapse, their faces black with grime, their eyes wide and hollow. They look at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They are no longer just a crew. They are survivors of a massacre. They look at the burning Shermans, then back at their own tank. The Tiger, battered and scarred, sits defiant in the center of the destruction, a steel monument to their survival. Check the running gear. Hans, we need to move before their artillery zeroes in on these fires. Rost says, breaking the spell. The reality of war returns. They cannot linger here to celebrate. The smoke acts as a beacon for Allied spotter planes, and the Jabos fighter bombers will be hunting for them soon. They have won the tactical engagement, but the strategic situation remains dire. They are 5 men in a broken tank, deep in enemy territory, with a long retreat ahead of them. The victory is hollow, bought with luck and terror, but it buys them one more day of life. The silence that descends upon the sunken lane near Villers-Bocage is heavier and more oppressive than the cacophony of battle that preceded it. The roar of the 88mm gun and the screaming engines of the Shermans have been replaced by the crackling of burning metal and the rhythmic, ticking sound of the Tiger's cooling steel. Obersturmführer Karl Rost stands on the engine deck of Tiger 231, his boots resting on the warm grating, looking out over the graveyard of armor he has created. 5 pillars of thick, greasy black smoke rise vertically into the still summer air, marking the final resting places of the Allied tanks. The smell is a nauseating cocktail of diesel, burnt rubber, cordite, and the distinct, sweet stench of roasted flesh that every tanker knows but never speaks of. Rost takes a deep breath, trying to clear the acrid fumes from his lungs, but the taste of battle is stuck in the back of his throat. His hands, still gripping his binoculars, are trembling with a fine, uncontrollable vibration caused by the adrenaline crash. He looks down at his crew, who have spilled out of the hatches to inspect their fortress. They look like spectres, their faces blackened by soot and oil, their eyes wide and rimmed with white where the goggles protected them. There is no cheering, no backslapping or celebration of their victory. There is only the profound, exhausted relief of men who have looked into the abyss of death and been granted a temporary reprieve. Hans, the driver, walks slowly to the front of the tank, running his hand along the glacis plate like a man checking a horse for injuries. He stops at the gouge left by the Firefly's 17-pounder shell on the gun mantlet. The steel is torn and jagged, shining bright silver against the dark yellow camouflage paint. Hans traces the scar with a trembling finger, realizing that the difference between life and death was a matter of centimeters and the angle of impact. If the British gunner had aimed a fraction lower, the shell would have penetrated the turret ring, and they would all be dead. The physical evidence of their mortality is staring them in the face, a cold reminder of the gamble they take every time they close the hatches. Richter joins him, staring at the impact point with a detached professional curiosity. He lights a cigarette, the flame of his lighter illuminating the grime on his face. He takes a long drag, holding the smoke in his lungs before exhaling slowly. He nods to Hans, a silent acknowledgement of the driver's skill in angling the armor at the crucial moment. They do not speak. There is nothing to say that hasn't been said by the violence of the last hour. They are alive because the German steel held, and because they functioned as a single, cohesive unit when the panic set in. But they also know that luck played a massive role, and luck is a finite resource in Normandy. Braun, the loader, is busy at the rear of the tank, kicking at the twisted remains of the exhaust mufflers. The last Sherman's shell had sheared the heavy cast-iron covers away completely, leaving the exhaust pipes exposed and mangled. The damage is superficial in terms of combat capability, but it means the engine will be louder and the heat signature more significant. Braun picks up a piece of shrapnel, weighing the jagged metal in his hand before tossing it into the ditch. He looks at the loose track pins on the right side, frowning as he sees how far they have walked out. They need a sledgehammer and 20 minutes of hard labor to seat them back in, or they risk throwing the track on the next turn. Friedrich, the radio operator, remains near the Hull machine gun, scanning the tree line with a pair of captured American binoculars. The infantry has retreated, melted away into the bocage, but the threat of a sniper or a lone bazooka team remains. He watches the fields intently, looking for the unnatural sway of a bush or the glint of optics. The birds have begun to sing again in the distance, a surreal juxtaposition to the burning wrecks in the foreground. The French countryside is beautiful, lush and green, indifferent to the destruction that humans have brought to its soil. It is a stage that does not care about the actors or the tragedy of the play being performed. Rost climbs down from the deck and walks over to the nearest burning Sherman. It is the Firefly, the nemesis that had hunted them through the orchard. The heat radiating from the wreck is intense, forcing him to shield his face. The ammunition inside is still cooking off, small pops and bangs echoing from the interior. He looks at the white star painted on the hull, now blistering and peeling away. He feels no hatred for the men who died inside, only a grim, soldierly respect. They were professionals, just like his crew, sent to die in a tin can that was outmatched by his Tiger. It is a waste, he thinks, a terrible, industrial waste of life and machinery. The tactical victory is absolute. They have destroyed an entire platoon of 5 tanks without losing their own. In the propaganda newsreels back in Berlin, this will be hailed as a triumph of the Aryan spirit and superior German engineering. But standing here in the smoke, Rost sees the strategic defeat. For every Sherman they destroy, the Allies land 10 more on the beaches. The sky above is empty for now, but soon it will be filled with typhoons and thunderbolts, the dreaded jubbos that rule the air. The Tiger is the king of the ground, but it is a king without a kingdom, fighting a defensive war against an enemy with infinite resources. Obersturmführer, Friedrich calls out softly from the tank. Radio message from battalion. We are to pull back to Sector 4. New defensive line forming. Rost nods, feeling the weight of the order. There is no rest. They have held the road, bought time for the retreat, and now they must move again before they are encircled. The war does not stop for them to catch their breath. They are firemen running from one blaze to another, trying to stem a tide that is already washing over the dam. Sector 4 is 5 kilometers rearward. Another patch of bocage, another ambush point, another chance to die. All right? Listen up, Rost breaks the silence, his voice regaining its command tone. Hans, Braun, get the sledgehammers. Fix that track. Richter, check the oil levels. Friedrich, keep watch. We move in 15 minutes. The crew snaps out of their daze, grateful for the direction. Routine is the antidote to trauma. They move with practiced efficiency, retrieving the heavy tools from the stowage bins. The clang of the sledgehammer striking the track pins rings out, a rhythm of repair that replaces the rhythm of destruction. They work quickly, glancing nervously at the sky, knowing that a stationary tank is a magnet for air attack. As they work, Rost climbs back into the cupola to check his maps. The interior of the tank is cooling slightly, but the smell of spent propellant still clings to the upholstery. He looks at the empty shell casings littering the floor, the brass glinting in the gloom. Each one represents a moment where they unleashed death. He counts them mentally. 7 rounds. 7 rounds to kill 5 tanks. It is efficient shooting, a testament to Richter's skill. He runs his hand over the leather breech guard of the 88, feeling the warmth of the metal. This gun is their savior and their curse. It keeps them alive, but it also binds them to this war until the bitter end. The repairs are finished quickly. Braun stows the hammer and wipes his greasy hands on his trousers. Track is secure. Sir, he reports. The men climb back into the tank, sliding through the hatches like eels returning to their burrow. The familiarity of their stations offers a strange comfort. This steel box is cramped, smelly, and dangerous. But it is their home. It is the only place in Normandy where they feel a semblance of safety. Hans settles into the driver's seat, adjusting his headset. Engine start. Rost commands. The Maybach roars to life. coughing smoke from the broken exhaust before settling into a rough, throbbing idle. Advance. Destination Sector 4. Keep to the tree line. Rost orders. Hans engages the gear, and the Tiger lurches forward. They drive past the burning wrecks of the Shermans, the heat washing over the hull as they pass. Rost looks at the Firefly one last time as it disappears behind the hedge. It is a tomb now, a steel monument to the crew that almost killed them. He offers a silent salute, a gesture of respect from one warrior to another, before turning his gaze forward to the road ahead. The past is smoke, the future is uncertain, only the present moment matters. The Tiger rumbles down the lane, its tracks chewing up the dirt. Moving away from the scene of the duel, they pass a group of German infantrymen retreating in the opposite direction. Tired men in dusty field, grey uniforms who look up at the passing giant with a mixture of awe and pity. They know the Tiger is invincible, but they also know it is alone. The infantry waves, and Friedrich waves back from the hull gunner's position. It is a fleeting connection between the armoured knights and the foot soldiers, a shared recognition of their doomed struggle. They are all walking the same road, toward the same inevitable conclusion. As the sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields, the adrenaline finally fades completely, leaving Rost with a profound sense of melancholy. He thinks of his family in Hamburg, wondering if they are safe from the bombers. He thinks of the end of the war, which he knows is coming, and wonders if he will live to see it. The Tiger feels invincible today, a god of war that has struck down its enemies with lightning and thunder. But Rost knows the truth. They are not gods. They are just men in a machine, running on borrowed time, fighting for a cause that is already lost. The documentary camera pulls back, rising high above the hedgerows. The Tiger becomes a small, camouflage speck moving through the vast, green tapestry of France. The smoke from the 5 burning Shermans drifts into the sky, merging with the clouds. The sound of the engine fades into the distance, replaced by the wind rustling through the leaves and the distant, rolling thunder of the artillery. The war continues, grinding on with indifferent cruelty. But for the crew of Tiger 231, they have survived one more day. They vanish into the shadows of the bocage, ghost soldiers in a ghost tank, heading toward the next battle, and the next, until the luck finally runs out. The screen fades to black. The credits roll silently, accompanied only by the haunting sound of the wind blowing over the open fields of Normandy.